The city always hummed, like an anxious heartbeat that never quite calmed. Eli Walker stood in front of the wide glass windows of his penthouse apartment, staring out at the skyline like it was a blueprint he had once drawn but now couldn't recognize. Skyscrapers pierced the dusk, each one a testament to someone else's triumph, someone else's plan. He used to think life was a structure, designed, measured, calculated. But tonight, everything felt like it was crumbling. His phone buzzed for the fifth time in 5 minutes. He didn't look. He already knew who it was. Eli, the board's pulling out. They're choosing the Santiago firm. Earlier that afternoon, those words had unraveled years of late nights and sacrificed weekends. The project, a cultural center in Lisbon, was meant to be his redemption, his firm's comeback. Instead, they chose something more visionary, more fluid, less rigid. Less like you, Eli thought bitterly. He hadn't told anyone yet, not even Naomi, who was now pacing in the kitchen, wine glass in hand, trying not to say what she really meant. Can you just talk to me, Eli? He turned slightly, his voice a strained whisper. What is there to say? She stopped. Her eyes were tired. She'd been tired for months, and he'd been too focused on saving his career to see it. You don't let anything happen. You build your whole life like one of your models. Neat, perfect, sterile. But life moves, Eli. It breathes, and you are doing my best, he interrupted sharply. But were he honest, he'd admit he didn't know what his best was anymore. Naomi placed her glass down with finality. I can't keep doing this. Not when you're not even here. Not really. And just like that, she left. That night, Eli didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling until the early light made it too painful to keep lying there. At dawn, he packed a duffel bag, left his phone on the kitchen counter, and drove. No destination, no GPS, no calls. Only one thought tugged at him: the cabin. He hadn't been there in over 10 years. The place where his father died. The place that felt like silence and loss and 1,000 unspoken things. It called to him now, not as a homecoming, but as a reckoning. The road to the mountains wound like a forgotten thought, steep and uncertain. By the time Eli reached the cabin, dusk had returned. Only this time, there were no city lights, no sounds, only the cold quiet of pine trees and a door that creaked open like a sigh. Inside, everything was as he left it. The dust-covered books, the faded plaid chair his father used to fall asleep in, the fireplace blackened with time. A single photo still hung crookedly on the wall. Eli as a child, smiling stiffly next to a man who never once said, I'm proud of you. That night, Eli sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket of old grief and new confusion. The silence wasn't peaceful. It screamed. It scraped at his nerves. His mind spiraled, trying to rebuild something. Anything. But nothing made sense. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't fight it. He just let it all fall. Tears came, not loud, not dramatic, just slow like thawing ice. He didn't wipe them away. He didn't analyze them. He simply let them be. Outside, the wind moved through the trees in soft rhythms. No rush, no plan, no force, just flow. The morning after Eli arrived at the cabin, he woke to complete silence. A silence so thick, so unbroken, it felt like pressure against his eardrums. In the city, there was always a murmur, a soft backdrop of motion. Here, there was only breath, wind, and memory. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed, its wooden frame creaking beneath his weight. Dust motes floated in the sunlight, filtering through the cracked blinds. The air smelled like pine and thyme. He didn't know what to do, and that terrified him more than anything. By mid-morning, he had unpacked. If unpacked meant dumping his duffel bag on the floor. His laptop remained untouched. There was no signal, no internet, no distractions. He wandered around the cabin, touching old furniture like it might speak. He stopped in front of the old bookshelf, running a finger over its spines. Walden, Leaves of Grass, a collection of Carl Jung's essays, and a thin, tattered book titled The Wisdom of Insecurity by Alan Watts. He remembered his father reading it out loud once, voice slow and steady. To put it still more plainly, the desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. To hold your breath is to lose your breath. Back then, Eli had scoffed. Now the words rang with a truth he couldn't quite hold. He stepped outside. The woods stretched in every direction. Towering trees, a narrow dirt path, a slow stream winding nearby. He could hear birds distant and indifferent. A squirrel darted past his boots and vanished. No car sounds, no people, no control. The cabin had been his father's refuge. After his wife died, after his practice collapsed, after he abandoned the world and called it peace. But Eli never saw peace. He saw escape, weakness, silence that turned into emotional absence. As a boy, Eli would build towers from stones by the creek while his father sat reading. He remembered looking up, hoping for attention, a nod, a smile, anything. But his father was always inside himself. Now Eli realized he had become the same. He found himself at the creek again. It hadn't changed. The same bend, the same fallen tree, now moss-covered, the same chill in the air. He knelt, picked up a stone, and skipped it across the water. 1, 2, sink. He tried again. 4 skips. He almost smiled. Then suddenly, a shout. He jolted upright. A voice? Out here? Number. Not a shout. A song. Soft, drifting through the trees like it belonged to the wind. A woman's voice. Not words, but humming. Gentle. Alive. He followed it, cautious but curious. And there she was. A woman stood on a rock across the stream, back turned, long dark hair woven with wildflowers. She wore layers of earthy clothing, simple, loose, like a monk or a wanderer. She was barefoot, humming as she balanced a pot over a tiny fire. She turned. Their eyes met. "Hello," she said calmly, as if they were old friends meeting again after lifetimes. Sorry, I didn't know anyone else lived out here." "I don't," she said. "Not really. I just come and go." She smiled, then returned to her cooking. "You live in the cabin?" she asked, stirring something fragrant. Eli nodded slowly. "Just for a while." "Good," she said. "You look like someone who needs to stop running." He blinked. "Excuse me?" She didn't elaborate, just kept stirring, then added, "I'm Mira." He hesitated. "Eli." She looked at him like she already knew his name. They sat on stones by the fire, sharing a warm stew from chipped bowls. Mira spoke very little. When she did, her words were strange, poetic, unhurried. "I used to live like you," she said, filling calendars, checking boxes, trying to hold everything together. "What changed?" Eli asked. "I stopped. Just like that?" Number I died first. He stared. She smiled. "Not literally, but everything I thought I was, it burned. And in the ashes, something softer grew." There was a long silence. This time it didn't scream. She pointed at his chest. "You're still clenching, even here." He exhaled through his nose. "I've lost everything." Or, she countered gently, everything that wasn't you finally fell away. Back at the cabin as night settled in again, Eli felt something unfamiliar. Stillness that no longer felt like punishment. He lay in bed, Mira's words circling his mind. Everything that wasn't you finally fell away. Could it be true? Could collapse be a form of clarity? He didn't know, but for the first time in months, he slept without waking. The next morning, Eli wandered back to the stream, uncertain if Mira would be there again, or if she had only been a strange dream that hummed and stirred stew. The forest felt different now, not because it had changed, but because something in him had shifted, however slightly. The wind didn't sound quite so empty. The silence still held space, but it no longer pressed down on him. As he walked, he kept hearing Mira's words. "You're still clenching." She was there, perched barefoot on a boulder, eyes closed, hands resting on her knees in a simple form of meditation. The fire was out. Her hair, tangled and soft, moved with the breeze. He didn't speak at first, just watched. Then, as if sensing him, she opened her eyes. "You're early," she said, smiling. "I didn't know there was a time." "There isn't," she said, "but most people wait until the pain gets unbearable before they come back." Eli hesitated. "I'm not in pain." She looked at him gently, saying nothing. He sat down on a fallen log, rubbing his hands together. You talk like one of those spiritual people. I talk like someone who lived a long time trying not to feel. That hit a little too close. They walked together later, slowly with no destination. Mira carried a small woven pouch, collecting herbs and flowers as they went. She moved like the forest was familiar, like it was listening. You grew up in the city, didn't you? She asked. Eli nodded. Manhattan. That explains the eyes. What do you mean? You look at everything like it's a problem to be solved. He frowned. That's how I make sense of the world. And what happens when the world stops making sense? He didn't answer. They paused at a clearing where wildflowers grew in colors too bright to name. Mira crouched and began weaving a crown of them, humming softly. Do you know Alan Watts? She asked suddenly. Eli blinked. The name sounds familiar. My father read him, I think. He used to say, muddy water is best cleared by leaving it alone. She stood, placing the crown on her own head, laughing at how silly she probably looked. You keep trying to fix your life like it's broken, but it's not. You're just uncomfortable with not being in control. He folded his arms. So what? Just give up? Float around in the woods and pretend that solves things? Her gaze didn't flinch. Number, you stop forcing things to be what they aren't. You stop fighting the river, and maybe, just maybe, it carries you somewhere you never imagined. They sat in the grass for a long time, Mira weaving a second crown, this one for Eli. He resisted when she tried to put it on him, but eventually gave in. He looked ridiculous, and maybe for the first time in years he laughed. Not politely, not with restraint, but openly, freely. It echoed through the trees like a bird finally set loose from its cage. As the sun began to sink, Mira stood. Time for me to go. Where? He asked more quickly than he meant to. She tilted her head. Does it matter? He exhaled. Will I see you again? Maybe, she said. Maybe not. But if you sit still long enough, everything you need finds you. She paused. Even you. Then she disappeared into the forest without another word. Back at the cabin, Eli sat on the porch, her words weaving through him like wind through trees. Even you. He didn't understand her, but for some reason he wanted to. For now, that was enough. It had been 5 days since Eli last saw Mira. He didn't know why that bothered him so much. They'd only met twice. She was a strange one at that. But something about her silence, her knowing eyes, and the maddening calm in her voice had taken root in his thoughts like ivy through old stone. And so, he waited. Waited and wandered, chopped wood and didn't write, watched the wind curl leaves and tried to name trees he didn't know. The stillness began to scrape at him again. He sat at the old wooden table, staring at the blank screen of his laptop. He had come here to write, or maybe to escape, but the document titled What Comes After Collapse remained cruelly empty. He typed a sentence, deleted it, typed another, backspaced every word. He felt something rising in his chest, tight, old, familiar. Failure. He slammed the laptop shut. Why can't I just write? The echo of his voice in the cabin startled him. It sounded like a child's tantrum in a cathedral. Outside, the clouds thickened, and the air turned cold. A storm was moving in. He lit a fire, but it didn't help the restlessness. He paced. He cursed. He remembered Naomi's last words. You build your whole life like one of your models, neat, perfect, sterile. But life breathes, Eli. And you? He slammed his fist on the wall. Then, exhausted, he slumped to the floor and pulled an old box from under the bed, his father's. Inside were yellowing pages, a few pictures, a map of hiking trails, and, strangely, another book by Alan Watts. The book on the taboo against knowing who you are. He opened it. His father had underlined a passage. The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. Yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. Eli stared at it, his throat tightening. His father had read this? The same man who demanded grades, achievements, discipline? Had he understood it? or only tried. He looked up at the ceiling, suddenly aching with a sorrow he didn't know how to name. The storm hit by nightfall. Thunder cracked above the cabin like bones breaking in the sky. Rain pounded the roof. Eli sat in front of the fire, a blanket over his shoulders, watching flames flicker and hiss. That's when he broke. Not with violence, but with softness. He cried, not just for losing the project, not just for Naomi, but for his father, for the boy who only ever wanted to be enough, for all the years he tried to earn what love never needed to be earned. The next morning the storm had passed. The world outside looked washed and raw. The air smelled of pine and wet soil, and inside something in Eli had loosened. He didn't try to write. Instead, he boiled water, made tea, and simply sat. He watched steam rise from the mug. He noticed a spider rebuilding its web between two beams on the porch. He listened to the rhythmic drip of rainwater falling from the roof into a puddle, and without even meaning to, he smiled. For no reason. That afternoon he returned to the stream. He knelt, placed his hands in the cold water and whispered, "I don't know what I'm doing." The trees didn't answer, but the breeze stirred gently, and he remembered Mira's words. You stop forcing things to be what they aren't. You stop fighting the river. He closed his eyes, breathed, let the question remain unanswered. And something inside him shifted, not like a door flying open, but like the quiet click of an old lock finally releasing. Later, as he walked back to the cabin, he found something at the doorstep, a bundle of herbs tied with twine, and a single note. Surrender is not the same as giving up. It's the beginning of hearing your own voice again. M. The morning mist hung low over the trees like a secret. Eli stepped out of the cabin, barefoot, drawn to the sound of the nearby stream, not by decision, but by instinct. The cold grass beneath his feet felt electric, alive. He hadn't checked his phone in days. He no longer reached for it out of habit. The screen stayed black and dead in a drawer, like a memory of someone else's life. The stream was louder today, rushing after the storm. It had carved new patterns into the soil, flooded small trails, and dragged branches downstream like they were nothing. Eli crouched beside it, hands on his knees. He stared into the current. He remembered the way he used to live, meetings stacked like bricks, emails like static in his brain, calendar blocks choking his breath. There had always been this need to direct, to steer, to master time and outcome. But this river didn't ask permission to move. It didn't apologize for its twists or for carrying things away. It didn't rush or hesitate. It just flowed. And suddenly he knew. He had lived his entire life like a dam, trying to hold everything back, control it, shape it. But the water didn't care. And maybe that was freedom. Mira returned that afternoon. She appeared like always, without sound or warning. One moment she wasn't there, and the next she was sitting cross-legged on a flat stone by the water. "You're finally listening," she said without looking at him. Eli sat beside her slowly. "To what?" "To everything you used to silence." They sat for hours, barely speaking. Eli expected her to fill the silence with poetry or parables. Instead, she offered no teachings, no lessons, only presence. And somehow, that was more unsettling. "I keep trying to understand this," Eli said finally. "What I'm supposed to do with all this stillness." "You keep thinking this is about doing," Mira replied softly. "It's about undoing." He frowned. "Undoing what?" "Everything that taught you you weren't enough as you are." Later, Mira took him to a hidden bend in the river, one she said few people ever found. A pool where the water calmed and deepened, protected by leaning trees and flat stones warmed by the sun. She stripped down to her underclothes and stepped in without hesitation. Eli hesitated. "It's freezing." "It's real," she said. He followed, the water biting his skin, stealing his breath. But once submerged, something opened in him. Not a thought, not a word, just a widening. He floated on his back, eyes closed, the sky holding him. The current cradled him without effort. He didn't need to swim or fight or resist. The river carried him in slow circles, and he let it. For the first time in his adult life, he was doing nothing. And it wasn't terrifying. It was sacred. They lay on sun-warmed rocks afterward, silent and wet, drying like animals in the open air. Mira turned to him and said, "When you stop forcing life, life begins to reveal itself." He didn't argue. He didn't question. He only nodded, because this time he felt it, not in his mind, but in the marrow of him. That night back at the cabin, Eli journaled for the first time, not to write a book, not to explain, just to notice. "There's a part of me that doesn't need fixing, a part that was never broken. I buried it under deadlines, praise, performance, but it's still here, watching the river, remembering how to breathe." Eli awoke before sunrise. The sky was still dark, but the air was charged, like something was waiting to be noticed. There was no sound but the distant rustling of trees and the occasional creak of the cabin's old bones. He lay there staring at the ceiling, breathing slowly, and for the first time in weeks, he missed his old life. Not the work, not the noise, not the constant motion, but the illusion that he knew who he was. Later that morning, while walking to the river, he found an envelope nailed to a tree. No name, no stamp, just a small M written on the front. Inside, a single page of handwritten words. "We all come to the woods thinking we've lost something, but sometimes it's not something we've lost. It's something we never truly had. And in losing the illusion, we finally see clearly. Sit with what hurts. Let it fall apart. Then ask, what remains when nothing is left?" He stared at the note, his hands trembling. That day the weather turned. Clouds thickened. A fine, cold rain began to fall, and the world dimmed. Eli stayed inside. He didn't read. He didn't write. He didn't cook. He sat and sat and sat. The hours passed and the silence grew unbearable. It scraped at him, not gently this time, but like a blade drawn across the nerves. He stood, pushed the chair back. His breath quickened. His skin itched. He opened his laptop, desperate for distraction, but the screen glowed with nothing, empty, like him. He opened a file titled Career Proposal Phase 2 from months ago. Numbers, timelines, plans, goals, impressive language. He scrolled, faster, faster, then stopped. His throat clenched. What was all of this for? The walls of the cabin felt suddenly smaller, too close. He stepped outside barefoot again, rain soaking his clothes within seconds. He walked, no direction, just motion, until he collapsed, knees to mud, hands to earth. And there, with no one to see and no one to explain to, he wept. Not like before, not from a single loss or memory, but from all of it, all the years, all the masks, all the performing, the pleasing, the pushing, the trying to be someone, someone important, someone worthy, someone that never truly existed. He didn't return to the cabin until well past nightfall, soaked, shivering, and utterly hollow. He made no fire. He lay on the floor in the dark and whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." No voice answered, only the rain, only the dark, only the quiet. And yet, that night he dreamed. He was standing in a vast open field. Mira stood at the far end, silent, smiling, not beckoning, just being. The wind blew through tall grass. A river curved in the distance, moving endlessly forward. He looked down at his hands and saw they were clean, empty, unburdened. In the morning, he did not wake with answers. He did not feel whole. He did not feel healed, but he felt stripped. And strangely, in that rawness, there was peace. He sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the rain now a gentle drizzle. The trees dripped with silver light. He pulled out his journal and wrote, "Everything I thought I was is gone. What remains is silence. But maybe silence isn't empty. Maybe it's waiting for truth." The days that followed the storm of his unmaking were strangely still. Eli didn't feel better. He wasn't fixed. But he no longer fought to be. And that changed everything. He began to move slower, speak less, listen more. He noticed things he never had time for before. The chirp of a bird just before rain. How pine needles smell sharper after sunrise. The small gap of silence before a woodpecker taps. There was something sacred there in those spaces. Something that didn't ask to be understood, only witnessed. One morning, Eli walked to the river and found Mira already there, skipping stones. He sat beside her quietly. They said nothing for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Where did you learn to live like this?" She smiled faintly. "By dying first." He turned toward her, unsure what she meant. "I used to chase everything," she said. "Meaning, love, enlightenment, the whole how to be whole checklist." "And?" he asked. "I burned out, left my city, came here thinking I'd find some magical answer." She threw a stone. It bounced 3 times, then sank. "Instead, I lost everything I thought I was." Eli's breath caught. "That sounds familiar." She nodded. "There's a moment after the collapse when your thoughts start to slow. Not because you force them, but because they're tired of running. That's when something else comes in." "What?" "The space between them." That afternoon, Eli sat by himself on a sun-warmed boulder, eyes closed. No mantra, no breathing technique, no timer. He simply watched. Thoughts came. He didn't chase them. Memories flickered. He didn't follow. And then, for a brief second, nothing. No past, no future, just presence. He felt it like a soft breeze moving through his chest. It didn't stay, but it didn't need to. He had tasted the space. Later, back at the cabin, he opened his laptop for the first time in days. Not to produce, not to get back to work, but because something inside him wanted to express, not perform. He didn't write an outline. He didn't force a title. He just typed, "The river doesn't ask the mountain for permission. The pine doesn't need applause. There is a way of living that doesn't fight life. I am learning it. Slowly, awkwardly, honestly." He stopped, closed the laptop, and smiled. That night, Mira returned with a candle and a small bundle wrapped in linen. "For you," she said. Inside, charcoal and handmade paper. "What's this for?" Eli asked. "To draw." "I'm not an artist," she shrugged. "Neither is the wind, but it still moves." Eli spent the evening sketching the stream, the fire, the shapes the clouds made when no one was looking. Not to make something beautiful, but to see, to slow down enough to meet the world without needing to reshape it. Before bed, he wrote in his journal, "There is wisdom in not knowing. There is art in stillness. There is love, real, quiet love, in simply being." And then for the first time in years, he slept without dreaming. Eli was stirring honey into his tea when he saw the dust trail rising from the dirt road. No one ever came here, except Mira, and she didn't drive. He stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, heart suddenly tight. The car slowed, crunched over gravel, and stopped. The door opened, and there she was. Naomi. She looked thinner, paler, more guarded. Still sharp in posture, still dressed in urban black, still Naomi, but changed. He didn't speak at first, neither did she. Just two people staring across a field of broken history and unspoken things. Finally, she said, "You're hard to find." He nodded slowly. That was the point. Inside, they sat across from each other in the cabin. The air between them felt thick, not angry, but unswept. Naomi looked around, eyes scanning the sparse room. No signal, no Wi-Fi, no espresso machine. She raised an eyebrow. "You really did vanish." "I needed to," he said quietly. She studied him. "You left a company, a book deal, people who depended on you." "I left a version of me that was killing me." The words came out flat, calm, no apology, no defense. Naomi's eyes didn't soften, but they didn't harden either. They went for a walk down the trail toward the stream. Eli led. Naomi followed. He told her about the first week, the silence, the breakdown, the long sleep. He didn't mention Mira. Not yet. Naomi told him the company had been sold, that one of his protégés took his ideas and ran with them, that his absence had made him more legendary. Eli laughed a little bitterly. "Of course, I'm more useful as a ghost than I ever was alive." Naomi looked at him sharply. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Pretend you don't care. You always cared. You bled for what you built." He paused. "I did. But maybe I bled too much for things that couldn't love me back." At the stream, Naomi crouched and touched the water. Do you miss it? She asked. What? Being relevant. Being needed. He didn't answer right away. He watched a leaf drift by, caught in the current. I miss believing I needed it to matter. Naomi looked at him. He looked back. And for the first time, she didn't see armor. She didn't see ambition. She saw peace. Quiet, imperfect, real. It unsettled her, and it moved her. They returned to the cabin as the light faded. Naomi lingered at the door, car keys in hand. Are you coming back? She asked. Eli thought about the world waiting for him. Emails, calls, applause, attention. And he realized he felt no pull. No, he said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Naomi studied him. You sound like you've joined a cult. He smiled. Maybe. A cult of being. She rolled her eyes but smiled back. Small, reluctant, true. She left at dusk. No hug, no promise. Just a quiet nod, and then dust trailing behind her as she drove away. Eli stood watching until the road was empty again. Later, he wrote, she came like winter's last snow, sharp, familiar, cold. But I did not melt. I stood, not against her, just with myself. That night, Mira appeared by the fire. You saw her, she said. He nodded. You didn't break, she said. I didn't need to. Mira looked at him with quiet pride. Then you're not the same man who came here. No, Eli said, but I still don't know who I am. You're not supposed to. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. No one rushed to explain. No one tried to name the moment. And in that stillness, Eli knew he had nothing to prove and nowhere he needed to be, except here. Days passed after Naomi's visit. The trees began to bloom, soft pinks and pale greens spreading through the forest like slow fire. The river ran fuller. Even the wind seemed warmer. But Eli did not rush to define what had changed. He simply stayed. Saturday moved, watched. One morning he stood barefoot at the edge of the lake and whispered, I am not chasing anything today. I am not avoiding anything either. Let the sky do what it wants. And then he smiled. Because for the first time, he felt like the mountain, not the wind. Later that week, Mira invited him on a long hike. No destination, no map. They moved through pine and cedar, crossing streams and ridgelines until they reached a ledge where the world opened wide. Below them, miles of trees moved in waves. The horizon curved. The sun began to drop. And there in that gold silence, Mira spoke. You remind me of someone I knew, a long time ago. Eli turned. He was always trying to change the world, she said. Always in motion, always burning. What happened to him? He burned himself out. She took a long breath. That man was me. Eli said nothing, just sat beside her, feeling the air shift. I don't tell people that story, she continued. Most of them still think I'm some enlightened forest oracle. Eli laughed. But the truth is, she said, I didn't find peace. I lost everything else. And what was left just was. He looked at her, really looked. Not as a guide, not as a symbol, as a human. I think I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. She looked at him. No future promises, he added. No fixing. Just being. Mira didn't smile, but she reached out and took his hand. And that was enough. That night the fire was low, the stars vast. Eli sat cross-legged, Mira beside him, their shoulders barely touching. I used to think strength was pushing through, he said. Now I think it's staying when it's uncomfortable. Mira nodded. The mountain doesn't move. He repeated it softly. The mountain doesn't move. The next day, Eli found himself alone for a few hours. Mira had gone to trade at a nearby village. He wandered into the woods without purpose. No book, no journal, just presence. At the base of a hill, he came across a dead tree, hollow, cracked, but still standing. He sat beneath it and watched the way sunlight streamed through its broken limbs. And he realized, even what is broken can hold the light. He wrote it in the dirt with his finger, then erased it, then smiled. Back at the cabin, he boiled water and poured 2 cups of tea. When Mira returned, windblown and laughing, He handed her one without words. They sat in the doorway together, legs stretched out, sipping in rhythm. Not as lovers, not as seekers, not as anything to be named. Just two people who had stopped forcing life and found, and in the stillness, it was already full. Eli stood at the edge of the city. The skyline blinked in the distance, familiar but somehow smaller. The cars, the sound, the electric pulse, once intoxicating, now background hum. He didn't return to reclaim anything. He returned to live differently. Inside the coffee shop he used to haunt, the barista squinted at him. "You look different," Eli smiled. "I am." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. He ordered plain tea, took a seat by the window, and watched. People rushed past outside, phones in hand, brows furrowed, late for things. He didn't judge, but he didn't miss it. Later, he stopped by his old apartment. The landlord recognized him. "Thought you dropped off the map," he said. "I had to," Eli replied. "I was lost on it." He walked the streets, visiting pieces of his old life. The bookstore, the meeting room where he pitched his last venture, the bridge where he once stood, panicking, trying to hold it all together. He passed them like someone flipping through a photo album. No hate, no longing, just presence. On his last night in the city, Naomi met him for dinner. "You're really not staying," she said. "No. You seem content." "I am." She stirred her drink. "I thought if you walked away, everything would collapse." "It did," he said. "And I did too. But now and now there's space, and in that space something better is growing." Naomi looked at him, then smiled. "I envy that." "You can have it," he said, "but not by adding more. You have to let go." "I'm not ready," he nodded. "That's okay." They didn't speak much after that. They didn't need to. Eli returned to the woods a week later. Mira met him at the trailhead. No questions, no conditions. She handed him a piece of bark with a word carved into it. "Here." That was all. Seasons passed. The world turned. Eli taught local children how to write without structure, not for grades, but for truth. He sketched the trees as they changed color. He built a second chair for the porch. He watched the sunrise like it was the first one every morning. One day he wrote in his journal, "When you stop forcing life, everything changes. Not all at once, not how you expect, but deeply. And you start to see life was never against you. You were just holding on too tightly to be carried." In the final scene, Eli sits by the river, now a little grayer, a little slower. A child from the village splashes nearby. "Are you a monk?" the boy asks. Eli chuckles. "Number just someone who stopped fighting the current." "What do you do all day?" Eli looks at the trees, the sun, the sky. "I live."